NFL Injuries, Part 2, 2019 edition. Who got hurt, how it happened, and what are we gonna do about it? Stay tuned to find out. Hey everybody, Dr. Chris, orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine physician. Welcome to my channel, your favorite source for information on broken bones and other things.
That's a little doctor joke we like to make around here.
So today we are talking again about injuries from the NFL, National Football League of America. And this time we are doing the 2019 edition. I've included interesting injuries in this video, but if I've missed an injury that you thought was interesting, be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. So this first injury involves Auden Tate, who is a wide receiver with the Cincinnati Bengals. Auden was injured on November 17th of 2019 in a game versus the Oakland Raiders. And on the particular play where Auden was injured, he was hit while his back was turned by the defensive back. We can see that immediately after he was struck, he became limp on the field, exhibiting what we call flaccid paralysis, meaning that he went completely limp and was not moving any of his four extremities. Auden was attended to on the field by the training staff and was taken off the field with his neck immobilized and on a stretcher. Fortunately, on his way off the field, he was able to give the thumbs up to let everybody know that he was okay. Auden was subsequently cleared by the medical staff in the locker room after the game, and he was on the plane with the team later that evening. At the time of injury, he was diagnosed with a cervical strain and a concussion. And if we look at the slow-mo film taken from the perspective of the defensive back, we can see exactly how that happened. Although some people have suggested that this was a dirty hit or that this was a hit that targeted the head, when we look at the slow-mo replay, we can see that this is just not the case. This was actually a legal tackle from behind, and as Auden fell to the ground, his head unfortunately struck the chest of the defensive back who was performing the tackle. This caused Auden's head to be forced forwards into forward flexion of the cervical spine and also to the right. This ultimately caused the combination of forward cervical flexion and right lateral flexion at the same time. This severe degree of cervical bending was also combined with the impact of the hit on the back of his head. Therefore, we can see that the concussion was caused by the impact of the hit, while the cervical strain was caused by the forward and the lateral bending of the cervical spine. Oftentimes when people are injured, they hear us speak about sprains and strains of the various body parts. So what's the difference? A sprain is an injury to ligamentous tissue, and it implies that the ligamentous tissue has been either stretched or torn by the force of the injury. Strains, on the other hand, refer to muscular tissue. Sprains is ligaments, strains is muscles. Got it? And for more information on concussions, be sure to check out my video, Jessica I versus Shevchenko. Now this next injury involves a player named Danny Trevathan. Danny Trevathan is a linebacker for the Chicago Bears. Danny was injured on November 10th of 2019 in a game versus the Dallas Cowboys. He was injured while he was attempting to tackle the quarterback. He fell to the ground while tackling the quarterback, and he landed with his left hand contacting the ground first. Unfortunately, while his left hand was pinned to the ground by his descending weight, the left leg of the quarterback accidentally struck the back of his outstretched arm at the level of the elbow. We have only to look at the slow-mo replay to see that he suffered a gross, and I mean gross, not as in but as in a large-scale deformity of his left elbow. He was immediately taken off the field, but later exited the locker room wearing a sling on his left arm. Following this injury, no diagnosis has been given by the team. However, the GM of the Bears has stated that they expect that Trevathan may be able to return before the end of the season. And although many people on social media and in the news have reported that he fractured his arm, I don't think this is actually the case. If we look at the slow-mo replay, we can see that the deformity occurred exactly at the level of the elbow. And the mechanism in which he was injured is the prototypical, meaning the standard mechanism by which elbow dislocations occur. So it is most likely here that he suffered an anterior dislocation of his left elbow. And elbow dislocations are the second most common dislocation of large joints. As I mentioned, the typical mechanism is a fall on an extended elbow. And while it is possible for you to suffer an anterior dislocation if you fall on an extended elbow, it is almost certain for you to suffer an anterior dislocation of the elbow if you do that and get kicked in the back of the elbow at the same time.
Wow.
Dislocations of the elbow can be both simple and complex. If they're simple, they involve only the capsule around the joint, the medial and lateral ligaments of the elbow, and the muscles on the anterior or the forward part of the lower arm. However, if they are complex, then they involve all of that other stuff that I just said, plus a fracture to the radial head. And in fact, one such injury has been named the terrible triad because it has 3 terrible diagnoses. The diagnoses included in the terrible triad include a dislocation of the elbow, a fracture of the coronoid process, which is one of the bony parts of the elbow, and a fracture of the radial head. This triad is associated with significant laxity or looseness of the elbow after injury. And this just basically means that even after we put your elbow back in place, it's still going to be incredibly unstable and loose. So it's a bad problem. And you really don't want to have the terrible triad. And if I think about it, there's not really a happy triad. So I'm not sure why they just called it the terrible triad, but it really sucks. So you don't want to have it. Now, elbow dislocations may be associated with vascular injuries and transient neurologic problems. Typically, these are treated with a closed reduction, meaning we're going to pull on the arm and put it back into position. And then we're going to x-ray the elbow afterwards to make sure that, number one, it is concentrically reduced, meaning it's put back into position the way it's supposed to be. And that, number two, there are not any loose fragments that have been incarcerated in the joint, meaning that there aren't any pieces that have broken off, that have become stuck between the two surfaces of bone, because those fracture fragments would gouge the cartilage, causing premature arthritis, and that would be a bad thing. You wouldn't want that. Elbow dislocations can be treated both non-operatively and operatively. If, after you have successfully reduced the elbow dislocation, and you take it through a range of motion while preventing valgus, if the elbow stays intact, then it is relatively stable and it can be treated non-operatively with cast bracing or cast immobilization. If, on the other hand, the elbow is unstable after you have reduced it and you're taking it through a range of motion, then this is something that may require operative treatment with an external fixator and repair of the collateral ligaments on the medial side or the inside part of the elbow. And while the Bears have been relatively mum about the diagnosis and what the plans for Trevathan are, I suspect that after a short period of rest and immobilization in a cast brace, that Trevathan will likely be able to return to playing football with a brace in the future. So the next player that was injured is a player named Jermaine Kersey. Jermaine is a wide receiver from the Detroit Lions. He was injured on August 8th of 2019 in a preseason game against the New England Patriots. On the play that he was injured, he was blocking a defensive back when he was unfortunately rolled on from behind by an opposing player. His left foot was planted and trapped underneath, while the opposing player rolled across the back of his left leg. Immediately as the play continued, we could see that there was an obvious deformity of his left ankle. Jermaine was immediately attended to by the medical staff on the field, and his ankle was reduced and immobilized in an air cast. Ian Rappaport subsequently reported that he had suffered a broken leg and ankle injuries. Based on the mechanism of injury and the deformity noted, I would venture to guess that he had suffered a fracture dislocation of his left ankle by a pronation external rotation mechanism. The diagnoses that are typically associated with this type of injury include a fracture of the medial malleolus, a disruption of the anterior talofibular ligament or ATFL, an oblique fracture of the fibula, plus or minus a fracture of the posterior tibia as well. Normally, this is an injury which is treated operatively, and the typical procedure is an open reduction with internal fixation of the medial malleolus and the lateral malleolus. In some cases, stabilization of the syndesmosis, or the connecting tissue between the tibia and the fibula, must also be performed with either a screw or tightrope fixation. For more information on pronation, external rotation, ankle fractures, check out my video on Andre Gomez and his ankle injury. So finally, for the last one, this video involves a player named Lamar Miller. Lamar is a running back who plays for the Houston Texans. Lamar was injured in a preseason game on August 24th, 2019 in a game versus the Dallas Cowboys. And if we look to the video, we can see that while flowing to the hole on a handoff, that he was subsequently tackled by a Cowboys defensive lineman. Unfortunately for Lamar, he was struck on the outside aspect of his left leg when his foot was planted. As a result of the contact, a valgus force was applied to his left knee while his foot was planted. The video shows that there was an obvious deformity of his left knee. Like, in other words, it looked like his knee had turned sideways because his knee was bending to the side. And generally speaking, your knee is not supposed to do that because it's like a hinge joint. A subsequent report by Ian Rappaport stated that the team felt that he had torn his ACL and quite possibly had also injured his MCL. Well, the ACL and the MCL are two of the four main structural ligaments of the knee. The ACL being one of the cruciate ligaments that crosses in the middle of the knee, and the MCL being one of the collateral ligaments that are on the outside of the knee. Although there was no statement released by the team, we can expect that Lamar will undergo an anterior cruciate ligament reconstruction plus or minus a repair of the MCL, and that he will go on to rehabilitate his knee and return to football sometime next year or the year following. And if you want to know more about anterior cruciate ligaments and how not to injure them, check out my video, How Not to Tear Your ACL. So there you have it. I hope that this video was both entertaining and educational for you. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho.
Just a flesh wound.